Hi.
Oh, give everybody a moment. Hello, Walter. This is fun.
I hope Walter can come. I sent him a message. It's like, please come.
We have a Walter Perez and a Haley
Ah,
and an Alberto.
hi
So
Walter.
this is great. Walter says hello.
Hi, thanks for coming
Perfect.
back. Hi.
Awesome.
Giovanni, Carino. Hi. Hi Laura. Hi everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're waiting maybe another minute for everyone to come through. It would be great if you wanted to type in the comments where you were from, what you do, so we can get a little bit more information. As you can see, we don't. You can see Sarah and I, but we don't see you. It's just the way this is set as a webinar. But you can always write comments and everything in the chat, so we can read what you have to say. So yeah, where's everyone located? Where are you coming from? Are you in America? Are you in Europe? And did you attend another webinar? This is Sarah's second webinar with us. New York City, okay. Oh, wow. Ballet costume designer, that's amazing. Awesome,
Awesome.
great. Yeah, should we get started? Well, I think everyone can just join in as we go along. So this is, my name is Eloise. This is part of a webinar series that we have with SetPatrol. So SetPatrol is an online platform for filmmakers in Europe that allows them to buy and rent gear from each other, a secure platform. And we have a community building aspect to the website with free tutorials, webinars, production documents, all kinds of different things. So we had the pleasure of having Sarah, who's an amazing costume designer here in America. She's worked on many TV shows, American TV shows. This is our second webinar together. So today we're going to be mostly talking about budgeting with different design departments in mind, if that makes sense. So I think this should be really interesting, especially for those, I don't know how many of you are like directors slash writers slash producers. If you have a feature film in mind or short film project or a pilot, feel free to write in the chat as well. But this is really good from a producerial lens, I want to say. And this webinar I'm really excited about because I attended a similar talk that Sarah gave a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's super useful. It's basically like a masterclass on producing from a different lens. Yeah, awesome. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for
Yeah.
those who don't know you?
Yeah, well, first off, Eloise, thank you for the really lovely introduction. That was really nice. Thank you. My name is Sarah Cogan. I am a New York-based costume designer, and I have a background, my master's and my bachelor's degree in costume and lighting design from UC Santa Barbara, and then my graduate degree is from UC San Diego. I've been working over 13 years, and yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the basic rundown. So I utilize a a lot of my experience across the board as a designer to kind of help bring in the information that we're going to see today. And
Mm-hmm.
then some of the shows that I've worked on, like I've done a bunch of indie films and then also major shows like most recently Blind Spot season 5, which is now airing. So you can check that out on NBC. Give that a
It's
little
a great
plug.
show.
Thanks. It was fun.
Cool. So today, when we discuss budgeting, we're going to be focusing on several departments. So mostly costume, hair and makeup, and that's pretty much it, right? So those two big design departments.
Mm-hmm.
So when I guess when people are like considering their projects or writing their projects like very early on in the process, before even like thinking about budgeting for those departments, what do you think people should be clear on?
So when looking at your budgets and what you should be clear on, I think you really want to look at there's a few things of like, how big of a scale is the project in an overall?
Mhm.
And what is most important? Like, I was talking to a producer friend of mine about a show that they're on currently, and it was, a big network show. And he said, I've never been on a job where the execs want it to be like, we're spending so much money on the design of the show, hair, makeup, wardrobe, production design, because that's what's important in the budget rather than the fancy camera moves or other
Mhm.
things. And so really getting clear on what is the most important aspect of your storytelling tool. Is it that you need really great, clear design and to spend the money and to support those departments so they can deliver something that's exceptional? Or is it, okay, we don't need, it's contemporary, but there's nothing special about the clothes or the world. It's this moment right now, slice of life. So maybe we put the money elsewhere. And so I think being able to ask that question at the very beginning before you even start looking at all the variables will then help you break it down. As well as, and we'll kind of go into this, how much creative control do you want over what the world is? The more money you have, the more you can become really specific about what things can be. But as soon as you start taking money away or bringing the budgets down, you become more constrained by what's available. And so you end up having less creative control to then get exactly what's in your mind's eye. So you have to decide what's most important when it comes to the budget.
Mhm. That makes sense. So I guess in that process as well, like I know that often like young filmmakers and like film students are advised to like, especially when it comes to props and like on department and things like that and wardrobe to like kind of deal with what they have already. Like if you own something, use it. If that makes sense. Like if you have a bike, like you can have a film where there's a bike, right?
Yeah.
For other like I guess more ambitious projects, like I'm thinking like if your project is like set in a submarine, right? We're talking a lot about like I know those terms that you use as well as a designer, like built set versus like found design.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit like a little bit what that means, right? And
Yeah.
how you can navigate those choices.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen and show uh, some of the slides that I created. So really quickly, as we kind of go into talking about budgeting and all these things, I just want to clarify some terms. We've got budgeting, both like talking about the monetary budget and then your time budget. And you could even say like your resource budget, like the bike you mentioned, like that's part of your budget. You have that already. That's, something you can pull from. And then when we talk about genre, I'm specifically talking about the era or world in which the story takes place rather than, so like sci-fi, period, fantasy, rather than thriller, action, comedy, that, right? So, and then we'll kind of get into establishing looks, but that's when a designer's job is to establish it, to make sure it looks good on camera and that it works, and then to go away. And then costumes is solely in charge of the aesthetics of it, and the wardrobe is in charge of the maintenance of the clothing. And this is a really big thing once you start to get into unions, and there's nuances between the unions in different locations. And then hair and makeup are also their own separate departments. So just kind of as we start to talk about this, I just want to make sure I'm clear about those. So they're their own separate departments, and it's really important to think of them that way because it's the integrity of your design that's going to then be affected. And when we're talking about film, we're talking about, it's what you guys are seeing right now, right? This like bust of who I am. That's what everyone's going to see. So therefore, that's really going to tell people who our characters are and where they are psychologically. So making sure to pay attention to that and give that part of your visual, something is important. So when talking about built versus found, it goes into any aspect of hair, makeup, and costumes. So if you're going to be building costumes or making custom wigs or creating custom creatures, right? That and like monsters, then you can have exactly what you want. It just takes more time, and there's a little more of a dialogue back and forth of, here's what we've created, here's this idea, okay, is that what you want? Let's go back, make adjustments, come back. And it's this back and forth dialogue to then get to this final place once you're on set. um and then found design is, okay, maybe we don't have the money, or even if it's a contemporary film and you have a big budget film, if you're not creating something custom from scratch, then you're going out and you're buying clothes in the store that already exist. And so you then become, those become part of the parameters of the world you're creating. And when it comes to other genres, such as like period, sci-fi, fantasy, and more built worlds, that found design then becomes much more of a limiting factor in terms of what you get as a final product. And I think it's really important to think about this and ask these questions of, do we want this to be a built world, or do we want this to be a found world, and or something in between, a couple pieces maybe built, not all of it, doesn't all have to be. And if that's the case, then where does that put us budget wise? Do we have the budget for that? If we don't have the budget for that, like if we're doing something that's going to require more material costs or more time to build it, in our ideal case, and now we can't have that, how do we hold that in our own mind? So I think that's just about managing our expectations. Yeah, did I answer that well enough?
I think so. I mean, you guys can tell us if you have any comments, but I think it's something that is like essential, like you were saying, to keep in mind, especially when you're writing your scripts and you're deciding on the genre of the film, because built projects are expensive unless you have the resources, basically unless you have somebody in your life that is handy and can build you a set for close to nothing, right? Or like if you're adapting it, if that makes sense. Like if you have your location already and you're kind of modifying the location, and you have the resources to kind of meet halfway, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
When it comes to
for everything.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to costumes, it then becomes, I mean, I've done jobs where the last film I did was this like indie low budget feature. I just loved the script. I loved the world. And I was by myself, literally. Like I was the entire costume and wardrobe department and on set person and the designer and the shopper, and knowing that I kind of prepared myself as best I could, but then, you have last minute things. So I built costumes for it day of, because, or the night before, because I got last minute casting and the cast wanted something that we didn't have. So, so you can find that on a low budget project. So I wouldn't necessarily say, well, therefore we're never going to have it, but you have to assume that then becomes the discretion of the designer and what the designer wants to do. And their willingness to put in extra time.
Absolutely. So when, I guess, looking back at, once again, like considering all of this, when you're just starting your project, when you're writing the screenplay, we're writers, what are some what are some key script elements that you could see in the origin of the screenplay at the beginning of the writing process that could affect those departments, costume, hair, and makeup?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the elements that tend to affect budgets universally is going to be cast size and script days. So the cast size, ends up being, what is the material cost? So, and that's the number of bodies then, right? So you have the actual physical wardrobe that has to be purchased, and how much does that cost? And then you have the labor cost of what it takes to, if you have, 10 outfits on a day, how many people do you need to then steam out those 10 outfits and make sure everybody's ready? and the rooms are set and everybody gets to set on time and nothing's missing. So you might want 3 or 4 people on set that day just in costumes. And then you have to go like, okay, well, we also have 10 actors. So now we need, if each actor is 30 minutes in each chair, that's an hour in the chairs. Like how are we then going to be able to schedule our day in the most effective way? So then it becomes, how many people do you need to get them through the works? Maybe you do need 3 people or 4 people per department so that you have one person doing the like base prep and the next person doing the details, or, there's the lead makeup artist and then her second, and she, the second is then getting actors ready or taking over secondary characters. So you have to think about that in terms of the workflow that happens in terms of just the number of people per day and the cast size. And then when you get into script days, it becomes, okay, so using the last film I did, there was 1 script day. But you go like, great, that's easy, right? Well, if we're doing 1 script day and we're filming the actors filming in the same outfit every day for 3 weeks, we then need to have multiples of that in order to ensure that the integrity of the garments so that they don't get over worn out, as well as they're going to start smelling, and how do you keep them clean, because that's a hygiene situation. So then you're going to end up wanting to have multiples so you can have something at the dry cleaners and something at home or on set. And then when it comes to, again, that then becomes how many people, if we have a day with 5 looks for the main character, like let's go to the reverse of that, and we have a character with 5 changes, or there's 5 script days and they have 5 different looks. Now we have to do this turnaround, and when, whether it's hair, like with hair and makeup, it's how many new looks do they have in terms of hair and makeup, and the resetting of that during the day. And then also for a wardrobe, if that's 5 outfits, then we have to get the actor changed. That has to be established and approved with the costume designer. And then when they change for their second outfit, that first outfit has to be packed up and wrapped out so that it's safe and for continuity. So somebody has to stay there and deal with that, while that person then also, while somebody else then also preps the next outfit and makes sure all the other rooms are set and ready for all the changes. So there's a level of having to think about that, and that affects the budgets.
Okay.
That makes sense. And then the other thing is like stunts, gags, food scenes. So you could have, fight sequences, falls, water scenes, anything with a harness where they get picked up, blood, vomit, stepping in deep mud, being splashed by a car. Basically, all of these are moments where hair, makeup, and costumes can get destroyed on camera. And so, or you have to have multiples. So, or you'll want to have multiples, because if it gets there, because there's several reasons, right? Let's talk about like being splashed by a car hitting a puddle. If your character is getting splashed on camera and we see them going from dry to wet, then we want to keep one dry hero costume that's always clean and pristine, and then one that can get wet and is ruined and disheveled and stays that way. So that way, if we have to go back if we're shooting out of order, right, we have the 2 to go back and forth with. Whereas if we only have 1, that also means you get 1 take, right? Even in this scenario, you get 1 take, because you have the one you have to keep clean, so you can't touch that. And then you have the one that can get dirty. So if you want to have 2 or 3 takes to get the splash right with your car, you're going to need to have multiples of that. So when it comes to costumes, that then becomes, how many sets are we doing? If we're going to do, if we're going to do 3 takes, then we need 4 outfits. So 1 clean and the 3 takes to get dirty. And that's going to multiply the cost of that one look by 4 instead of 1, right? So that is a big effect. And then if we start talking about hair and makeup, it then becomes, okay, if they're getting splashed by this car, is their hair getting destroyed? Do we have time to reset, or do we need this to be a quick turnaround? We don't have time for their hair to dry. So do we need to provide multiple wigs so we can just wig them and pop a dry wig on between during resets? So then that's going to add a cost. So you have to start looking at where that then becomes the question of how big is your crew? What does this mean in terms of meeting your day? If you don't reset the hair, do you then decide, okay, they can't get wet all the way because we don't have the budget for wigs and we don't have the time for it to, to dry this actor's hair and reset it. So we're going to go with, we only splash her clothes. Right. So this is how you then start looking at the budget and then what the final product is based on that. And if you have fight sequences, then it becomes, do the clothes get ripped? Do we see blood? Is there a blood pump and we need to be able to reset the blood pump so that we can see it actually grow on camera? And, are we cutting the clothes open on camera, or are they getting ripped on camera? So then we need resets for that. And then each stage of that ripping and each stage of that cutting then has to be kept. There has to be one archival hero for each level. And that goes the same for, like, if you're in doing special effects makeup where there's scars or scratches and they're going to be doing actions and things might need to be reset, you then have to have at least 2 per each scar in order to make it per shoot day. So if you have a fight sequence, let's say, and you're shooting it over 2 days and they have a scar, they get a wound on the first day of filming, and then you're going to shoot it 3 days later, you're going to shoot the other half of the scene in a different location. You're going to need that scar again for that open wound again for the day in 3 days. So then you need 4 sets of wounds because you need 2 per day of filming. Just to make sure that, because they don't always remove well, and especially if they're fighting, then, things can get, it can kind of, the edges can peel up and they can have to be reapplied. So, and that can be something that really pulls your audience out of what you're watching.
Mm-hmm. And it's something, if you're not thinking about all these details and like doing your breakdowns with your designers and your like producerial team, your producers, then you're gonna have issues if you're deciding those things on the spot, right? Like if you're realizing that you're missing an item, or like you need another pair of clothes, of like shoes or whatever, like you're gonna have some issues. So it's something that you have to consider like well beforehand, before, like in pre-production.
I would even go further. Like, I would be thinking about this as soon as you're thinking about green lighting a project, because the other thing too is investors want to know where the money's going. And if you can say to them, look, I know that this is why costumes are going to cost this number, because there's a fight sequence, and in order to make sure that we get the best quality of footage, we need 4 outfits for it. So that makes, on a TV is a little different with the budgeting because you build closets. So you're kind of, there's like a rolling budget. Your budget kind of gets broken down slightly differently, but you want to think of it as like, I'm probably going to spend on the majors minimum of $1,500 on a lead character's head to toe outfit. So if I need 4 of those, that's $6,000. So just kind of thinking about it in that sense, and that's going, okay, but then what about a stunt double, right? Like, how does that work? And then there's other things that affect budget, such as surprisingly nudity. People think it tends to be free, like costless, but nudity requires modesty wear, and So you'll also, like, if there's a sex scene, then, it's not hygienic for the cast to actually be in physical contact. So you have like banana hammocks and um what are called shibus and hebus, which are strapless thongs that like cover people's genital regions for safety and health, as well as actors' comfort. And then you have comfort wear, which is robes and slippers, so that when you're between takes, they can be covered up and feel safe. And it's really important, especially in the nudity scenes, to really cultivate a respectful environment, and making sure that those things are provided is very important for that. And then, as I mentioned before, any sort of wounds or injuries will also start adding up the costs that you have, because it really, you can buy some stuff, some latex options online, but again, because you're buying it, it's found design, you have less control over what exactly you're getting and how well it'll lay on the body. um Tattoos become another thing, because again, just like scars or any sort of injury or prosthetics wounds, you then also run into needing multiples, because like any temporary tattoo, they wear off, and so you need to replace it. Also, you have to be mindful with any of these things about your actors' allergies, because you just don't know. And so if you can do a big test day and like let the actor actually test everything out, especially if they have any sort of prosthetics, whether it's prosthetic teeth, prosthetics on their face, facial hair that they don't actually have, because all of those things will affect the way that their face moves and their sound resonates and their ability to articulate and do their actual performance. So the more time you give with your cast to get comfortable with prosthetics of any kind, the better their performance will be and the more comfortable they'll be on set. A friend of mine that's a makeup artist had a woman wearing prosthetic vampire teeth, and a third of the way through filming that day, she was like, I can't do this anymore, because they didn't want to budget for 2 sets of teeth. So she couldn't take them off, and she could only drink smoothies and water, like liquids. So halfway through the day, she was miserable, plus she had a lisp that she hadn't expected, and she ended up ripping the teeth off on her own and completely changing everything. So that's why it's important to let your cast practice in the prosthetics and budget for multiples, so that you can have them take their prosthetics off, because also this actress couldn't close her mouth, right? So she could never relax. And 12 hours or more in prosthetic teeth is a long time. When it comes to uniforms will almost always have to be rented, and they're inevitably going to cost a lot more money. And so just kind of taking that into consideration, a minimum uniform rental is about $300 per uniform. So if you do a police officer, soldiers, postmen, assume it's going to be around $300. And then, just really quickly with sports, for example, football, if you're in New York, American football, there aren't any places with full teams. So of like colors of helmets and padding. So you're going to have that shipped in from LA, or you're going to have to pay for it and like buy it brand new. And that ends up costing you a lot more money. And then any sort of space suits or uniforms with fans cost about $800 to rent. Some you can get a little lower sometimes, but you then also are going to be ordering most of them from LA, and they're going to then cost, then you'll have the shipping costs to come here. And then, any sort of like mascot figure or fancy dress kind of costuming character is a very variable thing. So if you have a script where some like weird mascot comes like through, you have to decide, are we buying that or are we building it? And do we want to put the budget in towards that? I'm aware this is a lot of information. So thank you for sticking with me. And then you have like the non-design expenses that everybody forgets about. And that's just wardrobe rack, steamers, tables, chairs, shelving, transportation for costumes, for hair and makeup, because those are all things that really then add up if you don't think about them in your budget in advance. And then, that becomes, it also like, are you filming out in cold weather? You need to provide your cast then with warming gear. So that's another $50 minimum per actor to get the right, warming gear for them. Because it's all about making sure everything is available so that the day moves smoothly and efficiently, and that your cast feels supported and able to then show up on set and do their job, right? And so making sure that your design teams have what they need so they can then be there to service the cast and service the director and the producer's vision for the film is really important. And just making sure that they have the tools that they need to accomplish that, right? So those are the things that tend to get forgotten, as well as losses and damages. So if you rent costumes, you might end up then spending money on losses and damages if you end up using something for a stunt and an actor rips the jacket, or or something. I had a spacesuit once where the harness was painted black and it rubbed off on the spacesuit. So if I couldn't get the paint off, it was going to cost us $10,000 to replace the suit. So and the rental fee was like $800. So, I spent 3 days scrubbing it between everything else I was doing to get the paint off. But that's the kind of level of things that people go, oops, and then that's an extra expense that you weren't planning on. And it's very similar to renting, camera equipment and electrics and stuff, because again, there's losses and damages. So it's very similar.
That's a lot to consider, but I think it's important, like you were saying as well, to as you're kind of entering pre-production and collaborating with your designers to say like because it's impossible for you to think, specifically as like an independent producer, like director, right, self-produced project, like ultra budget, like to like consider those things, like, so let the designers like tell you what they need as well. And they'll say like, this is not possible, like he can only have 2 takes because we only have the budget for this amount of reset, right? So like always being in communication with your designers on any type of budget is very important as well, to know your restrictions that you have from the beginning. Totally. I'm thinking about people want to do like high genre films, so like sci-fi and horror and all these things that rely so heavily, whose like world you have to build with your designers, and budget is always kind of like restricting the world and also helping you like overcome, like be more creative with what you have. So how does budgeting affect those type of projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how budgeting affects all the genres is it varies, and like I look at contemporary as a genre. So in contemporary films, genre is affected by the question of, is fashion important? Are the looks, when we're talking hair, makeup, and wardrobe, that's what we're talking about with budget. Is fashion important? Is high end important, right? So, I have a picture of Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. That show is all about fashion. That was a big fashion forward show at the time and needed to be because of the storyline. So that inevitably makes it a much higher cost, because you're looking at trends, you're wanting to be fashion forward, you're needing to buy high-end clothing, work with you can work with product placement on a big scale movie like this. I'd say that product placement and using actors' personal things isn't always going to be an unknown, right? So if you may or may not be able to get the things you need when we're talking about contemporary shows and relying on free resources. It's a little up in the air. Plus, when you do product placement, it can be a beast in and of itself. My roommate was just working on a film as the costume coordinator, and they had a huge product placement and designer loans, basically like rental, like loans. And so it was a huge relationship with like 20 different vendors or 30 different vendors. And so maintaining those relationships and getting people the information that they need and tracking the pieces down, that adds a labor cost. And so that is a whole different person that needs to follow up and focus on that for a film, right? When it's high end and you're looking at, yeah, we're going to get $20,000 gowns for free, but somebody has to make sure that they're taken care of. And we have to have the insurance to cover those needs and that cost, if that makes sense for like contemporary. And suits are expensive. So even a H&M quality suit for a guy is $100 just for the pants and the jacket. And then you still have the shoes and the shirt and the tie. And are they wearing a tie pin or a pinky ring? Do you want props to give them a watch, or is costume stealing with a watch? Do they have a hat? Do they have an overcoat, a scarf? So they also have to need socks, or maybe they don't need socks. Like those are all things that then go into this suit look that base minimum is going to cost you $100 just for the jacket and the pants. So thinking about that when looking at contemporary film and knowing that your actors often will not have the things that you want in their closets. So relying on that for telling the story of your character might not be the best plan of attack.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer it for contemporary?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
And for period becomes, there's a myriad of things when, as you get further back in time, the cost goes up. So also because they need different undergarment structures, and each of those is then a rental cost. So you might not be shopping in the stores for a period film, but you might be going to rental houses, and some will lend, so it then becomes what you need for that and kind of what the world is you're going for. The lowest that you can spend on basically anything from the 80s to now, you can kind of budget about $200 for as the minimum, but you're then going to be really limited to what you can find in thrift stores and vintage shops. And every item, even if you buy a $5 shirt, you need 3 or 4 of them to show up in your fitting. So you end up having to think about like, okay, I'm going to buy 5 shirts for this fitting, and like have a dialogue with the actor and the director of what we're using. And then when it comes to stunts, we might not be able to get multiples of something. So then do we need to find multiples that are contemporary and shop that? Or are we going to stick with the one thing we have and hope it makes it through the stunts? So then or are we building it from scratch? And that way we can build multiples and have what we want. And is that our way of dealing with stunts?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to hair, the question then always becomes to wig or to not wig. If you're wigging, then it saves you time in the chair, as well as it's easier to get the styles that people want, because wigs will hold your styling a little better than natural hair, and it's much faster. So if somebody has a hairstyle that takes an hour to set, then they're going to then be in the chair for the hour to have their hair set and the half an hour to do their makeup. They're in the chair an hour and a half. But if they do a wig, the wig is already styled while they're on set the previous day, or whenever the hairstylist wants to and has time. then when the actor's in their chair, it's just prepping their head for the wig and putting the wig on. So now you've saved 45 minutes in the chair. You get set moving faster, and you save time with, in overtime with the cast. And if, then that can be exponential sometimes. So those are like, also with a wig, does the cast have the hairstyle that you need for the period? And I will tell you that when it comes as a costume designer, if hair and makeup are inaccurate or incorrect for a period or a genre, it pulls away from anything that I do. So it's really important to put the money into the hair and makeup, because again, it's all about this, right, in film, and that sets our world, and we understand the worlds that we see these characters in and the story being told based on their context and juxtaposition in the world around them. And that is what hair and makeup does, is to say this isn't, and how that context, right, and juxtaposition juxtaposes our current world. So then having really strong hair and makeup really gives you this sense of like what the world is that these characters are in, what the parameters are, whether it's period or sci-fi and fantasy. Now, the challenge with sci-fi and fantasy with budget is you end up really having to rely on builds or alterations to kind of get what you want, because it's not necessarily going to be something you're just going to walk into a store and find, or and it could be a lot of rental houses, so the costs can go up exponentially. And then when you get into any sort of, with both period and sci-fi fantasy prosthetics, you then, like makeup for example, you then get into how far down that rabbit hole do you need to go? Are we doing corrective makeup like they did in Bombshell to get people's face structures to closer match the actual person's, or are we doing some sort of special effects prosthetic and like creature creation type prosthetic, like some of the insert any sort of like alien species from any sort of um, sci-fi film, right? So, or even just, are we doing, you could even have like maybe somebody is a burn victim, and then you have to also look at what that is. So then are you doing a live cast? Because that'll also kind of exponentially affect the cost of what that is. So you kind of have to look at, it's a lot of variables. I go further into this in the webinar series that I've been creating and building. And so like you can definitely, that'll be available online soon, and then you can kind of go deeper into that. It'll be available at designingthevoid.com/budgeting, and it goes deeper into this. But that's kind of like the basic, and then, kind of covers it. So yeah.
This is great. No, I think it's really essential, right? And specifically when you're like um like you're writing the screenplay, even like if you don't need to have secondary characters, like if you're doing sci-fi, then maybe you want to keep it like a cast like pretty low, right? Like the cast number pretty low, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We have time for a few questions. I see that we already have 2 questions.
Great.
Christine is saying, I know that you, Sarah, I know that you like went over this a little bit, so maybe if you have a general response to this, but Christine is asking, how many multiples do you recommend for one look? Do you have a general rule, or like is it really like per basis?
I mean, in a dream world, do you have a backup for every look just in case an actor's that crafty and like spills something on their shirt? But that's like the dream. At the end of the day, you might not be able to afford that.
Exactly.
So that ends up being, a part of that.
Yeah, and if something is expensive, then you just have to be really careful. It's like yeah.
Yeah, and and I think at the end of the day, when it comes to any of these things too, it becomes, if you're a producer or director looking at like trying to understand how to budget and what it all means for your films, then looking at it and just understanding like, oh, when I put this amount of money towards this, it means we're not, when my designer's coming back to me and saying like, that's just not, we can't afford that, instead of pushing back or getting annoyed by it, or like saying, well, just do it anyways, you can kind of come back and be like, oh, I understand where you are, and let me know what works and what we can have. And so it creates really more of an environment of open discussion and collaboration. And I think that that's the really important, that's a big important, I think, takeaway from this.
Absolutely. I hope that was helpful, Christine.
Oh, good. She said, thank you.
Great. Chloe's asking, is it possible to shop with returns in mind for period pieces, or is it a fixed loss cost? Like there's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question, Chloe. So it's a little tricky when it comes to period, because it'll also depend on the genre, like the era. So if you're doing, shopping in a contemporary world and trying to get it to look like another period, then it becomes, do you need to modify it? What are you willing to give up design wise and aesthetic wise to then buy with those returnable items, right? You might not get, like, there's certain things like, I don't need I can buy a contemporary belt. I can buy, depending on the period, a plain Hanes undershirt will be just fine, because it doesn't change after a certain time period. It doesn't change much. You can kind of cheat and fake things for sure, but you have to know that there's also a level and like for certain things, like you can't have a perfect period 1800s pair of pants, because they might not last the whole time, right? So thinking about the action, like it won't handle a fight sequence or something, so you might need to look and see what you can find. I mean, there is a level of that, so it's not always a lost cause. But if you're going to thrift and do vintage shopping, you end up being like either having to do a set sale afterwards to sell anything, or knowing that those costs are going to then get eaten into it. When you do, like on this last film I did, I had a really small budget, and it came down to like, I think $11 a piece. Like that was what I had budget wise. So if you think about it, like a coat is $40 minimum. Like I got a great deal on a coat. It was $40. That's 4 times the cost that I can, like, if I go, I have X amount of dollars and I need X amount of pieces, then what, or Y amount of pieces, then X dollars divided by Y pieces is my average cost per piece. So then I can kind of say like, okay, if I have an average of $11 per item and I'm going to buy this $40 coat, where is that extra $30 coming from? And how can I maximize this budget, because this coat is what I want and like it's perfect. So you just kind of have to start looking at that and knowing that if you are going to go down the shopping and returning route, you just kind of might not be able to have perfect period accuracy, but that's okay. And that's what needs to happen then, because that is the constraints of the current job. Like on my podcast, I talked with Katie Irish about The Americans, and it was set in the 80s, and she did multiples. You need multiples for the 80s so that it becomes finding the things that actually are important and could work, that are out there in the world that you can then buy multiples of, or it's finding dead stock and buying that out, right? And like, so dead stock being clothes that never sold from a long time ago that then now is available elsewhere. But that can also take a lot of time, because you don't walk into a store and buy dead stock. It's usually packed away and people don't always know what it is. So there's a level of time that goes into that. So I don't know if that answers it exactly.
It's I think, sorry to interrupt you, but I think the time is is also a currency, like you were saying, and you might, and returns are also time, right? So
Yes,
you
totally.
have to like, is it more worth it to go to like the Salvation Army for a skirt that is going to cost me like, I don't know, $40, like a period skirt or whatever, like, or a ball gown or something that I won't have to return, or do I need a return day if I'm getting it for free? Like, but time is also a currency. So I think if you're a director and you're planning on self-producing, or if you're a producer, like you also
Yeah.
have to consider those things that it, like with returns, like returns are so expensive.
Hmm.
Like returning things is also
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah, that's a cost for sure. And also as
Yeah.
a designer, if you're doing something by yourself and you're getting a flat rate, right? Like now I'm going to go out and shop stuff that I have to return, but they're not paying me for a return day. So
Hmm.
now that's eating into my time, right? And my own personal time. Or if I'm, you can also do things that are like take things out on memo from rental houses. And often, if you rent enough or keep enough for the production rental, they might just put the memo fee into your actual rental budget, like costs. But so there is that option where people rent things, you can memo things out for fittings, but then again you have to then bring it back and you have to track everything and make sure it gets back on time, or you're going to then be charged for it and it's going to be more than you anticipated. So there's also that aspect of it, right? I mean, it becomes, if you don't have time, then rental houses might be the only option you have. If you do have time, then maybe you want to start with thrift store shopping and seeing what you can find there, because then you maybe don't have to deal with the rental houses. Plus, when you use rental houses, you have to remember too, other people use those pieces. So, you, not that it's a bad thing, but that, they're, they're the same crayons in everybody has in their crayon box, right? Or when it's like playing Texas Hold'em, right? You have your cards on the table that are everybody's cards, and then you have the cards in your hand. So sometimes looking at my design, like I don't want what everybody else is playing with. I want what's in my hands.
That makes
Uh,
sense.
how do you? So Christina just asked a question. How do you organize numbers for
For the
labor
labor
costs?
costs, the unions provide that. It depends on the project, right?
Mm-hmm. So, uh, I think it's always good to kind of look at, the unions are out there to protect their workers and create safe, strong environments for people. So I think looking at what the unions put out there is a great kind of barometer of what's considered okay. But then also, people, when it comes to stuff, then in terms of like actual cost per like hourly or weekly or daily rates, like that varies based on project. And that's really the only thing that the unions can tell you is like, this is what this position is. And like, this is the definition of this position. This is what they get paid. And, like, this is their responsibilities. When it comes to like actually looking at the labor costs, I think when you're a designer and you're going to then propose a budget to somebody, you want to look at, well, what do I really need to get this done for them in the way they want it done? So maybe I need to hire another shopper. Maybe I need to um, bring in an extra tailor because we're going to have, 20 people coming in for fittings in the next 3 days that all shoot on the same day. And all of those 20 outfits need to be altered and ready to go first thing in the morning. So we need an extra tailor to get that job done. So understanding, like looking at that, and even as a producer, you can look at it and say, here's our ideal shoot schedule. What days look like the biggest problems? And then also knowing like for costumes, hair, and makeup, last minute casting gets very expensive and gets very difficult to deal with because your options are limited and you only have the ability to go out and buy or rent like what's easy to get, because you don't have the time to search in thrift stores. You don't have the time to build something from scratch. And so knowing like, if you're like, I have a small project, I know that we're going to shoot, like this is the window we're looking to shoot at, or we're pretty much planned on going to do, let's get as many cast members down as possible. now and get that information to the design team as quickly as possible so that costumes can get their measurements and get down that line, and hair and makeup can see who the actor is and what their needs are. Because it's really, especially like for a period, you're not original, you don't know what the cast looks like. You can't plan for what you're going to need. Will you need a wig? What kind of hairstyle can will work with that actor's hair from that period, and how can you get that? So the sooner you can get that information to your design team, the sooner they can start working on it and be prepared and have the time to order things, whatever it is that they need time for. Because usually like ordering or making or planning, the last thing you want is your design team to show up or to be kind of scrambling at the last minute, because then, we're telling stories about people and your people aren't fully thought out from a like visual storytelling, perspective. And, there's a lot of research out there that proves that all the judgments people make when they first meet somebody are all based off of what they look like and how they move through space. So based on that, if we're taking these clips of who these people are as they come through, we want them to be either like, if it's a quick pop in of a character and then pop out of like a day player or a one-liner character, we want them to be recognizable and then be able to walk right out and people go like, I know exactly who that person is and I understand that. And that takes a level of depth and conversation with both the director and the actor and and the design team to kind of make that happen. So like really thinking about with your budgets that you're investing in people understanding who these characters are and having the right quick judgments of them. Whether it's we want people to know that this is a swarmy person right away, or we don't want you to know this. We want you to think they're this, so that the fact that they're a liar or a manipulator is a surprise, right? So what are you playing with to then help tell that story? And then, so sorry, I think I kind of like then started down another thing. The cost ends up just being like, what do you need to make it?
I hope that was Christine, I hope that was helpful for you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. We're at time, but I hope that was fruitful, and that it's really, I think it's really interesting and key information to have when you're like launching your project. So let us know how it goes. It would be it would be lovely to like hear back from from you guys and see what you're up to and what you're like creating and stuff, and how you like incorporated like Sarah's tips into your projects as well.
I would love to hear that. And also, if you guys want to reach out and ask questions, I'm always happy to answer them. You can reach me on Instagram at Sarah Cogan Designs. So that's SarahCogan Designs. And I'm also
You
like,
have
you
a
can also,
podcast.
and I have my podcast, Designing the Void, which is at the Designing the Void on Instagram. And you can find that again at www.designingthevoid.com and anywhere you get your podcasts. So,
and we have another webinar next week with Sarah as well about building your vision as a filmmaker and working with designers. So that might be really compelling for you guys as well. And then on Thursday we have another one about being making it like breaking through in the commercial world as like a photographer and DP. So yeah, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, SetPatrol. We're going to be launching our website very soon. So yeah, you can just keep following everything on social media. Thanks, guys. See you soon, hopefully.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you.